The alarm clock cut through the silence of the room at 5:30 a.m., just like every weekday morning for the past 35 years. I reached out mechanically and found the button without opening my eyes. My joints ached from the dampness that promised a rainy day. Yonkers is always like this in the spring, damp, chilly, with winds blowing between the hills of the city. My house stood on Locust Hill, one of the 7 hills of Yonkers. Long ago, Arthur, my late husband, said that it made our city look like ancient Rome. He had a knack for seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary. I did not. To me, those hills meant only one thing: extra minutes of walking to the bus stop and shortness of breath on the way up. I got up, threw on an old robe, and shuffled to the kitchen. Every movement sent pain through my lower back, but I tried not to pay attention. Pain had become a familiar companion in recent years. The coffee maker, a gift from Arthur on our 25th anniversary, hissed softly. He died 3 years later, before he even reached retirement age. Heart failure. And here I am, still alive, though sometimes I wonder why. My name is Eleanor Prescott. I am 65 years old, and I have been working as a cashier at the Economart supermarket since my youngest son, Rainer, turned 6. Before that, I was a housewife. Then I worked part-time as a cleaner. I had to get by somehow when Arthur lost his job at the docks and went on a drinking binge for several months. At the time, I thought it was temporary, but now I've been standing at the checkout for over 30 years, ringing up purchases for people who look right through me. The coffee is ready. I take a sip and glance at the clock. 6:15. I have to hurry or I'll miss the bus. That means I'll be late for work. That means Dennis, our manager, will roll his eyes and say something like, "At your age, Mrs. Prescott, you should know better than to be late." He's 20 years younger than me and thinks he's doing me a favor by letting me work, as if I'm not one of the most experienced employees in the store, as if I don't know the cash register better than he does. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection. Wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes. Fiona, my daughter, keeps hinting that I should dye my hair. "Mom, you're not that old yet." But I didn't see the point. Who am I kidding? And spending money on dye? My pension isn't much, and I only work 30 hours a week. Dennis made sure I was put on a reduced schedule. Cost-cutting, he calls it. The commute to work took 40 minutes. The bus was packed, it was rush hour, and people were heading into New York City. Yonkers may be the 4th largest city in the state, but for many, it's just a bedroom community for the Big Apple. It's cheaper to live here and commute to Manhattan than to rent an apartment there. I stood clutching the handrail while young people sat with their heads buried in their phones. No one offered the elderly woman a seat, but I was used to it. The supermarket was quiet. It was Tuesday morning, not the busiest time of day. I opened my cash register, checked the receipt tape, and laid out the bags. Everything was according to protocol. Everything was as usual, the same monotonous ritual I had performed thousands of times. "Good morning, Mrs. Prescott," said Janine, the girl from the produce department. She was one of the few people who ever spoke to me. "How are the grandchildren?" "They're growing," I replied with a forced smile. I didn't like talking about my grandchildren, not because I didn't love them. On the contrary, I adored Fiona and Reiner's children. But they were strangers to me. Fiona wouldn't let me raise them, limiting our contact to rare meetings on holidays. And Reiner's children, twins Oliver and Iris, only came to my place when their parents needed a free babysitter. The day dragged on slowly. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of the scanner ringing as items were scanned. "Hello. Found everything you were looking for? Do you have a loyalty card? Do you need a bag?" The same phrases, the same movements. By lunchtime, my back hurt so much that I had to lean on the counter to keep from doubling over. During my break, I went into the break room and sat in the far corner with a sandwich I had made at home. Thriftiness is my middle name. I can't squander money like the young employees do, buying lunch at the cafe across the street. My phone vibrated in my apron pocket. Fiona. Strange. She rarely called me during the day. "Mom, could you pick up Zoe from school today? I have an important meeting and Greg is out of town. No hello or how are you, just straight to the point." Zoe is my granddaughter. She's 11. She's a lovely girl, when she's not rolling her eyes every time I open my mouth. "Fiona, I have to work until 5, you know that." For God's sake, Mom, you're 65. You could retire. Who's going to complain if you leave early? It's always the same. My job isn't a real job to them, just some strange hobby for an old woman who doesn't know what to do with herself. Dennis will be there, I replied dryly, and I need the money, Fiona. My pension isn't enough. If you need money, why don't you sell the house? It's too big for you on your own, and it's in a good neighborhood. You'd get a decent price for it. You could buy a smaller apartment and still have money left over. A house. My house, where Arthur and I lived our whole lives, where our children were born and grew up. To Fiona, it was just an asset that could be cashed in. I'm not selling the house, I said firmly, and I can't pick up Zoe today. I'm sorry. I heard an exasperated sigh on the other end of the line. Fine, I'll ask the neighbor. And she hung up. No thank you, no goodbye. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, feeling a familiar emptiness inside. It was as if my own daughter had sucked all the strength and emotion out of me, leaving only an empty shell. After lunch, the day became livelier as people came in from work. Again, beep, 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 greetings, questions, change. The monotony of the actions was soothing, allowing my thoughts to wander. I thought about Reiner. He had been calling less frequently lately. He used to stop by with his ex-wife Tessa and the twins on weekends, about once a month. After the divorce 2 years ago, he started showing up even less often. And now, there was this new woman, Verity. Reiner had met her 6 months ago, and since then I had only seen my son twice, briefly. At 7 o'clock in the evening, I finally got home. My legs were buzzing, and my back refused to straighten. The old house greeted me with its usual silence. I turned on the light in the hallway, and the yellowish glow of the lamp brought the photos on the wall out of the darkness. Our family in better times. Arthur with his broad smile, little Fiona and Reiner, me with my hair still dark and without that bitter crease around my lips. I hadn't even taken off my coat when the phone rang again. This time it was Reiner. Mom! My son's voice sounded unusually excited. I have news! Verity and I have decided to get married. I froze with my coat half off. What? But you've only known each other for… how long? 6 months? 8 months, Mom. What does it matter? When you know it's the right person, time doesn't matter. Reiner was 38 and talking like a teenager. Then again, after his divorce from Tessa, he seemed to have found a new lease on life. He bought a motorcycle and got a tattoo. And now this, a whirlwind marriage. Reiner, honey, maybe you should wait. Get to know each other better? You just got divorced. Mom, his voice grew colder. I'm not calling for advice. I'm calling to invite you to dinner this Saturday. We want to celebrate our engagement with the family. Fiona and Greg are coming with the kids. Verity's mom will be there too. What about your kids? Oliver and Iris? Pause. Tessa won't let them come. You know how she is. I had known Tessa for 10 years while they were married. She was strict, yes, but fair. And it wasn't her fault. It was just that Reiner had seen his children less and less after the divorce. They were like they didn't exist to him, a burden, a reminder of his failed marriage. Okay, I'll come, I finally said. What time? 6. And Mom, another pause. Be gentle with Verity, okay? Last time you were with her, not very friendly. Unfriendly? I just asked her a couple of questions about her job and she got nervous and started stumbling over her answers. Something about lifestyle consulting and coaching, vague and unclear, and then she spent the whole evening talking about trips she said she'd taken. Bali, Thailand, Peru. She talked about retreats and spiritual practices. It all sounded fake, like something she'd memorized. But Reiner looked at her with such admiration that my heart sank. Of course, dear. I'll be very welcoming. After the conversation, I finally took off my coat and went into the kitchen. I put the kettle on and took yesterday's soup out of the refrigerator. My thoughts revolved around the upcoming dinner and this woman, Verity Blackwood. Something about her made me instinctively distrust her. Maybe it was the way she looked at Reiner's house, appraisingly, as if estimating its value, or the way she touched his hand when he talked about his business, a small but profitable boat repair shop. Reiner had inherited his father's love of water and his skilled hands. On Saturday, I spent more time getting ready than usual. I put on a dark blue dress I had bought for Arthur's funeral, but it looked quite decent for a family dinner. I put on some lipstick, which I hadn't done in years. I wanted to look dignified, to give Fiona and this Verity no reason to look down on me. Reiner's house was in the best part of Yonkers, not far from the Hudson River. It was small but well kept, with a view of the water. He bought it with the money from selling the house he shared with Tessa after their divorce. He gave half of the money to his ex-wife, of course, but he was able to buy a nice place with the rest. Business was going well. I arrived at 6 sharp, and the taxi stopped at the neat front yard. Reiner opened the door without even letting me ring the bell. He must have been watching the window. "Mom!" He hugged me, and for a moment I felt needed again. "You look great. Come on in, everyone's here." The whole family was gathered in the living room. Fiona and her husband Greg, their children Zoe and 8-year-old Lucas, a middle-aged woman with dyed chestnut hair who must have been Verity's mother, and the guest of honor herself, Verity Blackwood. She was beautiful. There was no denying it. Tall, slender, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She looked about 30, maybe a little older. She was tastefully dressed in a simple but obviously expensive sand-colored dress with minimal jewelry and natural makeup. But there was something about her smile, something that didn't reach her eyes. "Eleanor!" She floated toward me, enveloping me in a wave of sweet perfume. "So glad to see you again." She hugged me, and I felt a slight tension in her body, as if she was uncomfortable with the touch. I smiled politely. "Likewise, Verity. Congratulations on your engagement." "Meet my mother, Priscilla," Verity said, pointing to a woman with dyed hair. Priscilla nodded at me, her gaze as appraising as her daughter's. It was as if they were both mentally taking inventory of everything they saw. Dinner was served in the dining room, clearly not by Reiner, who had never been able to arrange cutlery and napkins so beautifully. Verity tried to make a good impression. We sat down, and I found myself between Fiona and Lucas. Greg sat across from me, next to Zoe, and at the head of the table sat the happy couple. Priscilla took a seat on the other side of my daughter. "So," Reiner began, raising his wine glass, "I want to thank all of you for coming to share this happy occasion with us. Verity and I are getting married next month." "Next month?" I blurted out. "So soon?" Verity put her hand on Reiner's and smiled at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Why wait when two hearts have found each other? Right, dear." Reiner looked at her with such adoration that I felt uncomfortable. "We've decided not to have a big ceremony," he continued. "We'll just sign the papers at City Hall and then have a small reception for our closest friends and family." "And where are you planning to live?" Fiona asked, putting salad on Lucas's plate, who was looking at his phone under the table. "Here," Reiner replied. "And then maybe we'll look for something bigger." "Actually," Verity interjected, "we're thinking of moving to a warmer climate. Maybe Florida or California. Reiner could open a branch of his business there, right, honey?" I almost choked on my wine. Move? Reiner had never talked about leaving Yonkers. His business was here. His children lived here with Tessa. And although he didn't see them often, he did visit. "But what about Oliver and Iris?" I asked bluntly. An awkward pause hung over the table. Verity was the first to break the silence. "Of course, we'll bring them to visit us often during the holidays. They'll love living by the ocean." "Or they can come visit us," added Reiner, but there was no conviction in his voice. I looked at my son, trying to figure out if he was really ready to leave his children and move to the other side of the country. What I saw in his eyes scared me. He hadn't thought about it. He was just agreeing with everything Verity said. Dinner continued, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Verity talked about her plans to start an online coaching business. Priscilla chimed in about how her daughter had always been enterprising and determined. Greg discussed the latest sports news with Reiner. Fiona tried to get Lucas to put down his phone and eat. It was a normal family dinner, but I felt that something was wrong. After dessert, Verity suggested coffee. Fiona and I helped her clear the table, and in the kitchen I finally had a chance to observe my future sister-in-law without Reiner's watchful eye. "Verity," I began, arranging the cups on a tray, "Reiner mentioned that you met at some kind of seminar?" Yes, at a personal growth conference, she replied without looking at me. I was one of the speakers. And what did you do before that? I continued. Reiner said you traveled a lot. Yes, I've lived in different places, worked in different fields. What exactly? I pressed. Verity finally looked at me, and something cold and calculating flashed in her eyes before she put her friendly mask back on. Mostly in the service industry, consulting, event planning, nothing special. Mom, Fiona interrupted, stop interrogating her. I'm just curious, I defended myself. I want to get to know my son's future wife better. Verity smiled stiffly. It's okay, Fiona. Eleanor has a right to ask. After all, Reiner is her son, but there was a warning in the way she said it, as if she was reminding me of my place. When we returned to the living room with our coffee, Reiner and Verity announced that they had another surprise. They showed us photos of a small house in Florida that, according to Verity, had belonged to her aunt, who had recently passed away and left it to her. We're thinking of moving there right after the wedding, Verity said, starting a new life. But your business, Reiner, I blurted out. You can't just give it all up. I'll sell it, Mom, my son replied calmly. Verity thinks that with my skills, I'll easily find a job in Florida, maybe even at a bigger company. Verity thinks. Verity decides. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Always independent, always with his own opinion, he had now become a puppet of this woman. When it was time to say goodbye, Reiner called me a taxi and walked me to the door. She's amazing, isn't she? He asked, looking at the house where Verity was still talking to Fiona and the others. Reiner, I took my son's hand. Are you sure you're not rushing into this? Moving, selling the business. These are serious decisions. Mom, he pulled his hand away. I'm 38 years old. I know what I'm doing. What about the children? Are you really ready to leave them so far away? His face changed, becoming harder. Tessa hardly ever lets me see them anyway. Maybe if we're in Florida, they can spend all their summer vacations with us. Son, just think about it carefully, okay? Don't make any rash decisions. The taxi pulled up and Reiner opened the door for me. Mom, I love you, but this is my life. I'm happy with Verity. Please be happy for me. I got into the car and watched my son return to the house with the woman who, I was sure, would bring him nothing but trouble. I had a bad feeling, and years had taught me to trust my intuition. Something was wrong here, and I had to find out what it was before it was too late. After dinner with my family, I couldn't shake my uneasiness. I tossed and turned in bed, trying to fall asleep, but thoughts of Reiner and his hasty wedding wouldn't leave me alone. At 3 a.m, I gave up, got up, and went to the kitchen. I made some tea, sat down at the old kitchen table, and stared at the yellow floral wallpaper that Arthur and I had put up back in the 80s. What did I know about Verity Blackwood? Practically nothing. She was about 35 years old. She called herself a life coach. She had traveled extensively. She supposedly inherited a fortune from her aunt in Florida. That was all. Even her mother, Priscilla, talked only about her daughter's achievements at dinner, but gave no specific details. I remembered how last year my neighbor Dolores told me about her niece, who had been swindled out of everything by some con man. He met her on vacation, charmed her, married her 3 months later, and 6 months after that, he disappeared with all her savings and her mother's jewelry. Could something like that happen to Reiner? The next day, I called Fiona. Mom, it's 8 a.m. on Sunday, she grumbled. I'm sorry, dear, I just wanted to ask what you think of Verity. Fiona sighed heavily. Mom, don't start. Reiner is a grown man. It's his choice. But did you hear how she talked about moving? About him selling his business? Don't you think that's strange? You know what? Fiona said, her voice tinged with irritation. Reiner deserves to be happy. After everything that happened with Tessa, Verity makes him happy. Isn't that what matters? I didn't say anything. Fiona had always taken her brother's side, ever since we were kids. To her, Reiner was untouchable, perfect. She would never admit that he could make mistakes. Anyway, Fiona continued, if you're so worried, why don't you talk to him directly instead of spying on him behind his back? I'm not spying, I objected. I'm worried. Mom, I have to go. Lucas woke up. She hung up. I looked at the phone and shook my head. Clearly, I couldn't count on my daughter for help. I felt anxious all day long. By evening, I decided to do something I had never done before: search for information about Verity on the internet. My old laptop, a gift from my children for my 60th birthday, was slow, but I waited patiently for the search page to load. Verity Blackwood coach, I typed clumsily with one finger. The results were unimpressive. A few social media profiles that, judging by the photos, belonged to completely different women. I tried a few more search options but found nothing of substance. Strange for someone who calls herself a professional coach and conference speaker. Shouldn't she have a website, a blog, anything? The next day, Monday, I asked to leave work early, telling Dennis I had a doctor's appointment. He looked at me suspiciously, but let me go. Instead of the hospital, I headed to the Yonkers Public Library. There was free access to computers and the internet, and most importantly, Marjorie, the librarian, was there. She was an old acquaintance who could help me with my search. "Eleanor!" Marjorie exclaimed when she saw me. "What a surprise! I haven't seen you in ages." Marjorie was about 10 years younger than me, but we had known each other since our children went to the same school. Her son Patrick and Reiner had been friends in middle school, although they had since gone their separate ways. "Hi, Marjorie, I need your help." I told her about the situation with Rainer and Verity, leaving out the most disturbing details so as not to sound paranoid. "I just want to check that she is who she says she is," I concluded. Marjorie nodded understandingly. "A mother's intuition is a powerful thing, Eleanor. Let's see what we can find." She sat me down at the computer and we began our search. Marjorie was much more experienced than I was in these matters. She knew how to search for information in various databases available through the library and in local newspaper archives. After an hour of searching, we had very little. Verity Blackwood, 36 years old, born in a small town in Ohio. No college education, which she had mentioned at dinner. No record of working as a coach or event planner. But we did find a note in a local newspaper in Cedar Creek, Florida, dated last year. It mentioned a lawsuit against a Verity Blackwood by Howard Mason, an elderly widower who accused her of fraud. "Look," Marjorie pointed to the screen. "It says here that the case was dismissed at the plaintiff's request. That often happens when people settle out of court or—" She trailed off. "Or when they're intimidated," I finished for her. We found another article from an Arizona newspaper, 3 years old. Verity was listed as a close friend of local businessman Alan Rodriguez, who had suddenly sold his company and moved to Florida. 6 months later, he filed for bankruptcy. "Eleanor," Marjorie put her hand on my shoulder, "it could be a coincidence, or a completely different Verity Blackwood." "Maybe," I agreed, but inside I already knew it was her. That night, I thought long and hard about what to do. Should I call Reiner and tell him what I'd found, or should I try to find out more first? I decided to proceed with caution. There was too little evidence to accuse Verity of anything specific. Reiner would just dismiss me as a crazy old woman who didn't want to see him happy. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering information bit by bit. Every day after work, I went to the library, where Marjorie helped me with my research. We found several more references to Verity in different cities, always associated with wealthy men, usually widowers or recently divorced. And financial problems always followed her appearance in their lives. "She's like a vulture," I said to Marjorie. "She circles over the wounded and waits for the moment to strike the final blow." "You need to talk to your son," Marjorie insisted. "Right away." I agreed. I couldn't put it off any longer. There were less than 2 weeks left before the wedding. Reiner agreed to meet me at a cafe near his house. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. "Hi, Mom." He stood up to kiss me on the cheek. "I don't have much time. I have to meet with the wedding planner." "I won't keep you." I sat down across from him. "Reiner, I need to talk to you seriously." He sighed. "If this is about Verity, it is about her. Son, I'm worried about you. There's something wrong with that woman." Reiner rolled his eyes just like he did when he was a teenager and I tried to talk sense into him about dangerous friends or foolish decisions. "Mom, please. We've already discussed this." "No, we haven't. You're just ignoring my concerns." "Reiner, do you know what Verity was doing before she met you? Where did she come from?" "Of course I do. She told me about her life." "And what exactly did she tell you?" Reiner frowned. "What does it matter? I know everything I need to know." "Really?" I leaned closer. "You know she was involved in a court case in Florida? That she was accused of fraud?" His face changed, and for a second I saw doubt flash in his eyes, but he quickly regained his composure. "What nonsense is that? Where did you hear that?" "I found articles in the newspapers. Reiner, she's done this before. She gets close to men, gets access to their money, and then disappears. You're next." "Have you been spying on her?" His voice was cold. "Digging up dirt on the woman I love?" "I was worried about you." "And rightly so, as it turns out. Reiner, please, just postpone the wedding. Give yourself time to get to know her better, to make sure—" "Enough!" He slammed his palm on the table so hard that the cups jumped. Several cafe patrons turned to look at us. "I'm not putting anything off. Verity and I love each other, and we're getting married next Saturday, whether you like it or not." "She's using you." I grabbed his arm. "She wants your money, your business. Once you sell it and move to Florida, she'll—" "Shut up!" Reiner pulled his arm away. "You don't know anything about Verity. You're just jealous because I'm finally happy, because I have a life of my own, and you have nothing but your pathetic job as a cashier and an empty house." His words hit me harder than a slap. I leaned back in my chair, stunned by my son's cruelty. "Reiner." "No." He stood up, throwing the money for the coffee on the table. "I don't want to listen to this slander anymore. And you know what? You don't have to come to the wedding. I don't want to see you there if you can't support me and show respect for my future wife." He turned and left the cafe, leaving me in a daze. Several customers were still looking at me with curiosity and pity. I slowly gathered my bag and left, feeling devastated. It was raining outside, a light, drizzly rain. I hadn't brought an umbrella and now stood under the cafe awning, not knowing what to do next. Call Fiona? But what would I say to her? That I had a fight with Reiner because of his fiancée? Fiona always takes his side. I decided to go to my son's house. Maybe if we talked calmly, without prying eyes, he would listen to me. I couldn't just give up when his future was at stake. Rainer's house was a 15-minute walk from the cafe. By the time I got there, I was soaked to the skin and my shoes were squelching with every step. But I was just as determined as ever. I knocked on the door. There was no answer for a long time, and I had already decided that Reiner wasn't home when the door finally opened. Verity was standing in the doorway. "Eleanor?" She looked surprised. "Reiner didn't say you were coming." "He doesn't," I replied honestly. "I need to talk to him." Verity hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. "He's in his study. He's on the phone with a potential buyer for the business." Selling the business. Already. It was all happening too fast. "I'll wait," I said, taking off my wet coat. Verity led me into the living room and offered me tea, which I declined. We sat in awkward silence for a few minutes. I looked around the room, the photographs on the walls, the books on the shelves. They had collected all of this with Tessa when they were a happy family. Now another woman was in charge here. "You know," Verity said suddenly, looking at me intently, "you're wasting your time." "What do you mean?" I pretended not to understand. "Your search for information about me." She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. Yes, don't be surprised. I have friends in Yonkers. I was told that you and the librarian were searching for something on the internet, and I can guess what it was." I tried to keep a straight face. "If you have nothing to hide, then there's nothing to worry about." "Oh, I have nothing to hide." Verity stood up and walked over to the window. "But you're wasting your time trying to come between me and Reiner. He loves me. He chose me. And nothing you say or do will change that." Her voice sounded so confident that a chill ran down my spine. "If you love him," I said quietly, "then why are you insisting that he sell his business? Move away from his children? That doesn't sound like love." Verity turned to me, and for a moment her mask slipped, revealing anger and contempt. "What do you know about love, Eleanor? You sit alone in your old house working at a pathetic job. Your own children can barely stand to be around you. Isn't that a testament to your understanding of relationships?" Every word hit home. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. "I know my son," I said firmly, "and I know you won't make him happy." "Really?" Verity moved closer, towering over me. "Or maybe you're just jealous." Maybe you can't accept that he doesn't need you anymore? That I'm more important to him than his old, unwanted mother? At that moment, Reiner entered the room. He stopped in the doorway, his gaze shifting from me to Verity. "What's going on, Mom? What are you doing here?" I stood up, trying to maintain my dignity. "I came to talk to you, to apologize for what happened at the cafe. It was a lie, but I needed to be alone with my son, without Verity's influence. Honey," Verity approached Reiner and took his hand, "your mother is upset about our wedding. She came to tell you terrible things about me." Reiner tensed, his face hardening. "The same old story, Mom? I thought we cleared everything up." "Reiner, please, let's talk in private. This is important." "No." He shook his head. "I have no secrets from Verity. Whatever you want to say, you can say in front of her." I looked at Verity, who was standing next to my son with a triumphant smile on her face. She knew she had won. "All right." I took a deep breath. "Reiner, I found some information about Verity's past, about the trial in Florida where she was accused of fraud, about the businessman from Arizona who lost everything after meeting her. There are other cases. She hunts men like you, successful, vulnerable after divorce or loss. She uses them and discards them when she gets what she wants." I pulled a folder of printouts of articles Marjorie and I had found out of my bag and handed it to my son. "Here's the proof. Please just read it." Reiner didn't take the folder. Instead, he looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. "Are you serious?" His voice trembled with anger. "Are you so obsessed with hating the woman I love that you're willing to fabricate evidence against her?" "Fabricate? Reiner, these are real newspaper articles. Look for yourself." "Don't bother, dear," Verity interjected, her voice trembling as if she were holding back tears. "It's all lies." "I explained to you that I had a detractor who was harassing me and spreading slander. That's why I moved and changed jobs. I thought I had left it all behind." She sobbed, and Reiner immediately embraced her, shielding her from me as if I were the aggressor. "Mom, you've gone too far." His voice was icy. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is unacceptable. I'm asking you to leave. Now." "Reiner, please, just read the articles." "Go away," he almost shouted. "I don't want to hear these slanders. I love Verity, we're getting married, and if you can't accept that, then we'd better not see each other again." I stood there, stunned by his rage. My son had never spoken to me like that before. "Reiner," I said, "get out." He pointed to the door. "And don't come to the wedding." "I don't want to see you there." Verity clung to him, pretending to be frightened, but I noticed the triumphant gleam in her eyes. She had achieved her goal. She had come between my son and me and severed our bond. I silently gathered my things, put on my still wet coat, and headed for the door. I turned around one last time at the door. "I will always love you, son, and I will always be there if you need me." Reiner didn't answer. He stood there hugging Verity, his face twisted in disgust, directed at me. His mother, who had raised him, sacrificed everything for him, loved him unconditionally. I stepped out into the rain, and this time I didn't try to hold back the tears. They mixed with the raindrops on my face as I wandered down the street, not knowing where I was going. For the first time in my life, I felt completely helpless. I couldn't protect my son from the predator who had set her sights on him. All my attempts had only pushed him further away from me, right into her arms. At home, I sat in the dark, not turning on the lights, with a cup of cold tea in my hands. The phone rang. Probably Marjorie wanting to know how the conversation with Reiner had gone, but I didn't have the strength to answer. I didn't have the strength for anything. Verity's words kept running through my head. "Your own children can hardly stand your company." Was she right? Maybe I really was a bad mother. Maybe I didn't deserve my children's love. No, I knew that wasn't true. I had always tried to be a good mother, doing everything I could for Fiona and Reiner. Yes, I wasn't perfect. Yes, I made mistakes. But I loved them with all my heart and wanted only the best for them. And that was why I couldn't accept that Reiner had fallen into this woman's trap. The wedding was supposed to take place in 10 days. What could I do in that time? Go to the police? With what evidence? Old newspaper articles that didn't even contain direct accusations, only hints? Talk to Fiona? She wouldn't believe me, and neither would Reiner. I felt completely powerless. For the first time in my life, I was faced with a problem I couldn't solve on my own. I couldn't protect my own son from a danger he refused to see. The next few days passed in a fog. I went to work, mechanically performed my duties, and returned home. I didn't answer Marjorie's calls. I didn't call the children. I just existed, trying to come to terms with the idea that my son had chosen a stranger over his own mother, preferring sweet lies to the bitter truth. On the day of the wedding, I didn't go to the city hall. Instead, I sat at home looking at old photos. Little Reiner on his bike, me holding him by the seat. Reiner as a teenager, sullen and awkward, but still letting me hug him in family photos. Reiner with Tessa and the twins. A happy family that he has now destroyed for a woman who is cheating on him. The doorbell rang, and I reluctantly went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was Marjorie, with a determined expression on her face and a bottle of wine in her hand. "Stop hiding, Eleanor," she said, walking past me into the house. "Today we're going to drink wine and curse men who don't listen to their mothers." I smiled weakly. How nice that there is at least one person in this world who understands me. "Did the wedding already take place?" I asked, taking out the wine glasses. 2 hours ago," Marjorie nodded. "Patrick saw them leaving City Hall." Patrick, her son, worked for the city government. That was probably how she found out. "Well, there's nothing we can do now," I sighed, taking a glass of wine. "All we can do is wait for her to strike and hope that Reiner doesn't lose too much." "Or hope that you're wrong about her," Marjorie said softly. I shook my head. "No, I'm not wrong. He'll call me, sooner or later, when everything falls apart. And you know what? I'll be there. Because I'm his mother, and I'll always love him, even when he kicks me out of his house, even when he says cruel things." Marjorie raised her glass. "To a mother's love, the strongest and most selfless love in the world." We drank, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. The pain wasn't gone, but I had a friend who didn't judge me or think I was crazy. "What are you going to do now?" Marjorie asked as we settled into the living room with the bottle and the photo albums. "Go on living," I replied simply. "What else is there? Go to work, pay the bills, grow old alone." "Eleanor Prescott, stop it." Marjorie playfully slapped my arm. "You sound like you're 95, not 65. "You have your whole life ahead of you." I smiled bitterly. "What life, Marjorie? A daughter who only calls when she needs a free babysitter, a son who kicked me out of his house, grandchildren who see me as a strange old woman who says incomprehensible things. What about friends?" Marjorie poured wine into our glasses. "How about finally doing something you love, not just what you have to do?" I thought about it. When was the last time I did something for myself? Not for my children, grandchildren, or work. I couldn't even remember. "You know," Marjorie continued, "the library is starting a book club and a group for seniors where they teach you how to use a computer and the internet. That would be useful for you, considering your recent investigations." She winked, and I couldn't help but smile. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to start living for myself. That night, after Marjorie left, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts of Reiner and Verity kept me awake. I imagined them together, celebrating their wedding, planning their move to Florida. How soon would she show her true colors? How soon would my son realize he had made a terrible mistake? And what would I do when that happened? Would I take him back after all the cruel things he had said? After he chose her over me? Of course I would. Because I'm his mother. Because no matter what, I love him. But something inside me changed the day Reiner kicked me out of his house. Something broke in our relationship, and I wasn't sure it could be fixed. Maybe Marjorie was right. Maybe it was time to live for myself, not just for children who didn't appreciate my sacrifices. With that thought, I finally fell asleep, for the first time in many days, without tears. A year flew by unnoticed. Each day blended into the next, forming an endless series of identical mornings and evenings. Wake up, go to work, come home, go to bed. And then the same thing all over again. Birthdays, holidays, weekends. Everything seemed the same, devoid of color and flavor. After Reiner and Verity's wedding, I didn't receive a single phone call from my son. No cards, no messages, nothing. It was as if he had crossed me out of his life as easily as one crosses out a bad word in a letter. I knew from Fiona that they had moved to Florida almost immediately after the wedding. Reiner sold his business, to my horror, for well below market value. I had to close the deal quickly, he told his sister. Tessa and the twins stayed in Yonkers. Now Reiner only saw his children during rare video calls, which, as Tessa complained to my daughter, were becoming increasingly infrequent. Autumn turned to winter, and snowstorms hit Yonkers. I was still working at Economart, although it was getting harder and harder to get out of bed every morning. My joints ached from the cold, my back was stiff, and even the pills my doctor prescribed were becoming less effective. Dennis, my perpetually dissatisfied manager, became even more irritable. Apparently, his superiors were pressuring him because of declining sales. "Mrs. Prescott, you're working too slowly," he said to me every day. "The lines are getting longer. Customers are complaining." "I'm trying, Dennis," I replied, even though I knew I was working as fast as I always had. The truth was, they wanted to fire me, replace me with someone younger, more energetic, with lower salary demands. But I clung to that job like a drowning man clings to a straw. Without it and my modest pension, I wouldn't be able to pay my bills, and losing my home would be the last straw. In December, just before Christmas, Fiona called with an unexpected offer. "Mom, we're going to my mother-in-law's in Connecticut for the holidays. Could you watch the house and pick up the mail?" "Of course," I agreed, trying to hide my hurt. "How long will you be gone?" "From the 23rd to the 2nd of January. So no Christmas together, no family dinner around the tree. I'd be spending the holidays alone again." "Will you stop by to say goodbye?" I asked hopefully. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I don't think we'll have time, Mom. The kids have school plays and Greg has a work party. I'll leave the keys with the neighbor, okay?" I sighed. "Okay, honey. Have a good trip." "And Mom," Fiona added uncertainly, "Reiner will be there too, at Martha's in Connecticut, with Verity." My heart sank. So my children and grandchildren would be together for Christmas, all except me. "Say hi to him for me," I said quietly. "I will," Fiona replied without much enthusiasm. Christmas passed like the other days, in the silence of an empty house. I bought myself a small artificial tree and some new ornaments to create at least some festive spirit. I cooked a turkey, too big for one person, but I wanted to keep some tradition. In the evening, I watched old Christmas movies on TV, had a glass of wine, and fell asleep in my chair in front of the twinkling lights of the tree. In January, Marjorie finally convinced me to join a library club for seniors. I resisted for several months. I felt like I wouldn't fit in, that I would feel awkward among strangers. But the loneliness became so painful that I agreed. "Just try it once," Marjorie insisted. "If you don't like it, you don't have to go again." The club met twice a week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, after my shift at the supermarket. The first visit was awkward. I sat in the corner, not daring to talk to anyone. But gradually, the ice melted. A woman named Gloria, who was about my age, invited me to join her knitting group. A gray-haired gentleman named Harold, a former English teacher, suggested I sign up for the computer literacy classes he taught. "You can't get anywhere these days without the internet," he said, "and it's a great way to stay in touch with your family." I didn't explain that my family wasn't particularly keen on staying in touch with me. By February, I was attending the club regularly and even began to enjoy these meetings. The world, which had shrunk to the size of the supermarket and my home, began to expand. I learned how to use email and even created a social media account, although I didn't dare write anything there yet. One evening, on my way back from a computer literacy class, I ran into Tessa, Rainer's ex-wife, at the supermarket. She looked tired but dignified as always. "Eleanor!" She was genuinely happy to see me. "It's been so long." We hugged, and I suddenly realized how much I had missed this woman who had been like a daughter to me for so many years. "You look wonderful, Tessa," I said, although it wasn't entirely true. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was grayer. "So do you," she smiled. "How are you? Fiona said you were still working." "Yes, at Ecomart." "How are the twins? They must be so big now." Tessa's face clouded slightly. "They're 11 now. They're growing like weeds. Oliver has started playing basketball and Iris has taken up painting." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. We both avoided the main topic, Reiner. Listen, Tessa said suddenly, the kids and I are planning a picnic in the park this weekend, weather permitting. Would you like to join us? The twins would love to see you. I wasn't sure. Would they? They barely remembered me. After my parents' divorce, I had only seen them a few times, and after my argument with Reiner, not at all. I'm not sure. Please, Tessa touched my hand. They need their family, especially now with their father. She fell silent, but I understood. Does Reiner keep in touch with them? Tessa sighed. The last video call was 2 months ago. He promised to come for their birthday in April, but I doubt that will happen. I felt a pang of pain for my grandchildren. They didn't deserve such neglect. Okay, I'll come to the picnic, I agreed. On Saturday, the weather was indeed wonderful, warm for February and sunny. I baked chocolate chip cookies, the twins' favorite treat, and left for the park a little late. The bus was delayed. Tessa and the children had already settled down on a blanket in the clearing. When they saw me, the twins didn't rush to hug me like in old movies, but Oliver waved politely and Iris even smiled. They had grown up and changed. I recognized traits of Reiner at his age in Oliver, the same stubborn chin, the same attentive eyes. Iris was more like Tessa, but her smile was definitely her father's. Grandma Eleanor brought cookies, Tessa announced, helping me settle down on the blanket. With chocolate chips? Oliver perked up. Cool. We spent several hours talking about everything and nothing. The children talked about school, their friends, their hobbies. None of them mentioned their father, and I didn't ask. But when the twins went off to play ball, Tessa brought up Reiner herself. He called last week, she said, watching the children. Not them, me. He asked to borrow money. I froze with my cup of tea in my hand. Money? What for? Tessa shrugged. He didn't explain. He said it was just a temporary problem, that everything would be fine soon, but his voice sounded strange, tense. Did you give him any money? No. Tessa shook her head. I don't have any spare cash, you know. I've been barely making ends meet since my divorce, and he hasn't paid child support in 6 months. I felt anger rising inside me. Reiner doesn't pay child support for his children, but he asks his ex-wife for money? Did something happen to his business in Florida? I asked. As far as I know, he doesn't have a business there, Tessa sighed. He told Fiona he was looking for investors for some project, but Eleanor, I think that woman, Verity, has gotten him involved in some kind of scam. My heart began to race. So I was right about her. But that didn't make it any easier. Did Fiona say anything to you? Tessa asked. About Reiner, about his business? I shook my head. We don't talk about him. After the wedding, we had some misunderstandings. Tessa nodded understandingly. You tried to warn him, didn't you? So did I. He wouldn't listen. At that moment, Oliver came running up to us, out of breath, his eyes shining. Mom, can Iris and I go to the pond? There are ducks. Tessa smiled. Of course, just don't go too close to the water. The children ran off, and Tessa and I sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts about Reiner. I'm afraid for him, Tessa finally said. Despite everything, he's the father of my children, and I know that deep down he's a good man. I'm afraid too, I admitted. But what can we do? He made his choice. In March, I heard from Fiona that Reiner and Verity had had a fight. She called me about Mother's Day, which she was planning to spend with her in-laws, and casually mentioned that Reiner had called her in tears after some kind of conflict with his wife. Did he say what it was about? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Something about money. Apparently, Verity was unhappy that their financial situation wasn't as rosy as she had expected. I clenched the phone so tightly that my fingers turned white. Of course she was unhappy. She had been counting on an easy catch, and instead she got a man who had lost his business and was now struggling to survive. Have you talked to him? Fiona asked unexpectedly. In the last year? No, I replied honestly. He hasn't called, and I didn't want to impose. He asked about you, Fiona said after a pause. When he called, he asked how you were. Something stirred inside me. So he hadn't forgotten. So somewhere deep down, he still remembered he had a mother. And what did you say? That you were fine. That you were still working and living in the same house. I wanted to ask if he said hello, if he said he missed me, if he regretted our fight. But I didn't. If he had said something like that, Fiona would have mentioned it. In April, on the twins' birthday, Reiner didn't come, just as Tessa had predicted. Instead, he sent postcards and gift cards from a large online store. I attended the celebration. It was modest but warm. Tessa invited me, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity to see my grandchildren. We played board games, ate cake that I baked using an old family recipe, and for a few hours, I felt like part of the family. It wasn't the family I had dreamed of, but it was something. By May, my life had taken on a semblance of stability. Work, meetings at the library club, Sunday walks with Tessa and the twins, weather permitting. I even started taking yoga classes for seniors at the local community center. The pain in my back didn't go away, but it became less intense. At the center, I met several women my age, and we would sometimes get together to play cards or just chat over a cup of tea. They were lonely too. Some were widowed, some divorced, some had children who lived far away. We understood each other without needing to explain anything. Gloria, the woman who invited me to the knitting group, became my close friend. She was a widow like me, but unlike me, she had a wonderful relationship with her children and grandchildren. "What's your secret?" I asked her one day as we sat in a cafe after class. "How did you maintain such a close relationship with your family?" Gloria thought for a moment. Probably because I always respected their choices, even when I didn't agree with them. And also, I didn't forget about myself. Children respect you more when they see that you are a self-sufficient person, not just an appendage to their lives. Her words made me think. Maybe I had become too absorbed in my children. Maybe that was why they had so easily pushed me into the background when they grew up. In June, I received an unexpected call from Fiona. She sounded worried. "Mom, have you talked to Reiner lately?" "You know I haven't," I replied, feeling my heart start to race. "What's wrong?" "I haven't been able to reach him for a week, not on his cell phone or his home phone, and Verity isn't answering either." "Maybe they went somewhere? On vacation?" "Vacation?" Fiona laughed nervously. "Mom, they don't have money for a vacation. Reiner called me 2 months ago asking for a loan. He said they were barely making ends meet. That means he asked Fiona for money too, after Tessa. What was going on there? Have you tried contacting the neighbors or the local police?" "I don't know their neighbors." Fiona's voice was desperate. "How am I supposed to explain to the police that my adult brother isn't answering his phone?" "Then what do you suggest?" I asked. Pause. "I thought, maybe you could go there? To Florida? To check if everything's okay?" I almost dropped the phone. "Me? Fiona, do you remember how we broke up with Reiner? He kicked me out of his house. He said he didn't want to see me." "I know, Mom, but I'm worried. I'm really worried. I have children, a job. I can't just drop everything and fly halfway across the country." "And I can?" I said indignantly. "I have a job too, by the way." "I'm sorry." Fiona sounded guilty. "I shouldn't have asked. I just don't know what to do." I sighed, feeling my anger give way to worry. What if something really had happened to Reiner? "Let me think about it, okay? I'll call you tomorrow." I couldn't sleep all night thinking about Fiona's request. Go to Florida? Search for a son who had made it clear he didn't want to see me? What if I got there and he was fine? What if he just didn't want to talk to his sister, the way he didn't want to talk to me? On the other hand, what if he was in trouble? What if that woman, Verity, had done something terrible to him? By morning, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to Florida, not because I didn't care about my son, but because I respected his choice. He was a grown man, and he had chosen to cut himself off from his family. If he wanted to rebuild our relationship, he knew where to find me. Maybe it was cruel. Maybe it was pride I couldn't afford at my age. But I felt I had to finally start respecting myself, even if that meant refusing to help a son who had rejected me. When I called Fiona to tell her my decision, she was disappointed but not surprised. "I understand," she said quietly. "After the way he treated you, I was just hoping." "If you're so worried, why don't you go?" I asked. "Or ask Greg." "Greg won't go," Fiona sighed. "He never got along with Reiner. And I just can't leave everything behind right now." "Then let's wait a little longer," I suggested. "Maybe he'll show up." But the days passed, and there was still no word from Reiner. Fiona called me every few days, growing more anxious. I tried to reassure her, but I felt a growing unease myself. What if I had made the wrong choice? What if my son really needed help and I had turned him away because of my wounded pride? Deep down, I knew I had to go. I had to make sure he was okay. But something was holding me back, a mixture of resentment, fear, and yes, pride. The pride of a woman who had been taken for granted for too long, who had been used when needed and forgotten when inconvenient. And so I stayed in Yonkers, continuing my quiet, measured life, while somewhere in Florida, my son was possibly struggling with the consequences of his mistakes. I told myself that he had made his own choice when he chose Verity over his family, his children, his mother, and now he had to live with the consequences of that choice. But every night, lying in bed, I stared at the phone, hoping it would ring and I would hear Reiner's voice asking for help. And every morning, I woke up with a heavy heart because the call never came. Pride prevented me from taking the first step, but love made me regret it every day. It was a normal Thursday, an unremarkable day at the end of July. I came home from work, reheated yesterday's stew, and settled down in front of the TV with my plate on my lap. The news was followed by commercials, then commercials followed by TV shows. I wasn't particularly interested in what was happening on the screen. My thoughts were wandering somewhere far away. There was still no news from Reiner. Fiona gradually stopped her anxious phone calls, apparently resigned to the idea that her brother simply didn't want to keep in touch with his family. Or maybe she had found out something after all, but decided not to share it with me. I was almost dozing off to the monotonous voice of the talk show host when the doorbell rang. It was sharp and insistent, making me jump and drop my fork. It was almost 10 o'clock in the evening, too late for visitors. I approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I asked, not removing the chain. "Mom, it's me. Please open the door." I would have recognized that voice anywhere. Reiner. My son, whom I hadn't seen in over a year, was standing on the other side of the door. My hands trembled as I removed the chain. The door opened, and I saw him, gaunt, thin, with tired eyes and stubble turning into a beard. He looked older than his 39 years, as if he had been through something that had aged him a decade. "Reiner," I breathed, not knowing whether to hug him or keep my distance. He decided for me, stepping forward and hugging me tightly. I felt his shoulders shake and realized he was crying. "Mom!" His voice broke. "I'm sorry." "You were right. You were right about everything." I stroked his back like I did when he was a child and came to me with scraped knees or after a fight with his friends. My boy, my son, so big and so broken. "Hush, hush," I whispered. "Everything will be okay. You're home." We sat in the kitchen, him with a cup of strong coffee, me with tea. Reiner looked exhausted, with deep shadows under his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, staring into his coffee as if afraid to meet my gaze. "Fiona doesn't have room, and Greg, well, you know, we never got along." "Of course you can stay here," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your room is still yours." It was true. I hadn't touched his room since he moved out years ago. Even when he married Tessa, I kept everything as it was. The rock posters on the walls, the sports trophies on the shelf, even his old comic book collection in the drawer under the bed. "Thanks." He looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Gratitude. "I don't deserve your kindness, not after how I treated you." "You're my son," I replied simply. We were silent for a moment. Outside, the summer night was gathering, warm and starry. Somewhere in the distance, a car drove by, playing loud music. Then it was quiet again. "What happened, Reiner?" I finally asked. "Where's Verity?" His face contorted as if in pain. "She's gone." 2 months ago. She took all the money, my car, even my watch, a gift from my father. She disappeared as if she had never existed. I didn't say, "I told you so." There was no need. He already knew. "How did it happen?" Reiner took a deep breath, then began to tell me the story. It was exactly as I had feared. After moving to Florida, they lived in a house that supposedly belonged to Aunt Verity. It turned out that the house was rented for a short time, and there was no aunt at all. Reiner looked for work, but couldn't find anything suitable. Verity convinced him to invest the money from the sale of the business in some kind of investment scheme, which turned out to be a scam. We lost almost everything. Reiner shook his head. I started working part-time at the marina, repairing boats, but it still wasn't enough money. Verity became increasingly irritable, saying that I had let her down, that she had hoped for a different life. I listened silently, fighting the urge to say, of course she was hoping for an easy catch, and she got a husband with financial problems. In May, I got sick, Reiner continued. Some kind of virus, nothing serious, but I was in bed with a high fever for a week. Verity was strange, distant. She was always going out, saying she had things to do. I was too weak to ask questions. He took a sip of coffee, his hand shaking. When I got better, I discovered that our joint account was empty. All the money we had left was gone, and so was Verity. She left a note. This isn't what I signed up for. Goodbye. Oh, Reiner. I touched his hand. I'm so sorry. I tried to find her, he said desperately. I called her mother, Priscilla, but the number was disconnected. I went to the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. She was my wife. She had a right to the money, and there was no evidence of fraud. Did you try to contact Fiona? Yes, but she... He hesitated. She wasn't very happy to hear from me. I asked her for money several times over the last year and never paid her back. I think she decided I was after her again. I remembered Fiona's anxiety, her request to go to Florida. So she had talked to her brother after he disappeared, but decided not to tell me about it. What about the children? Oliver and Iris? Have you spoken to them? Reiner's face contorted with pain. No, how could I? What would I say to them? That their father was a loser who abandoned them for a woman who ruined him? They miss you, I said quietly. I've seen them several times this year. They never talk about you, but I know they miss you. Reiner lowered his head, and I saw tears running down his cheeks. I ruined everything, Mom. Everything that mattered, my family, my kids, my job. I lost everything because of her. I was silent, not knowing what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to hug him, to tell him that everything would be okay. Another part screamed, "What about me? You kicked me out of your house when I tried to warn you. You chose her over me." How did you get here? I asked, trying to change the subject. Hitchhiking, mostly. Reiner shrugged. I had a little money left, enough for a couple of buses. The rest was hitchhiking, cheap motels, sometimes just sleeping on the street. I imagined my son sleeping on a park bench or at a bus stop, and my heart ached. Are you hungry? I asked, standing up. I have some stew I can heat up. That would be great. He smiled weakly. I haven't had anything hot to eat in days. While I heated up the food, Reiner sat silently, staring into space. He looked lost, broken, unlike the confident man he had been before. Verity had taken not only his money, but also his confidence, his strength. He ate greedily, but neatly, like a man who hadn't seen proper food in a long time but hadn't forgotten his manners. I looked at him and saw the boy I had raised, the young man I had been proud of, the man who had broken my heart with his betrayal. What are you going to do now? I asked when he finished eating. Reiner shook his head. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I'm completely broke. I have no money, no job, no home. Just debts and a broken marriage to a woman who probably never even loved me. You can stay here, I said, as long as it takes to get back on my feet. Thank you, Mom. His voice trembled. But I can't just accept your help, not after what I did to you. We'll talk about that later, I said, getting up to clear the table. Right now, you need to rest. Go take a shower, I'll get your room ready. He stood up, shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other, as if unsure how to behave in the house that had once been his home. Mom, He hesitated. I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. Even when I was angry, even when I said those terrible things, I was just blinded. She knew how to manipulate me. She knew my weaknesses. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Too many emotions were boiling inside me. Relief that he was alive and well, joy at his return, bitterness at the memories of his betrayal, anxiety about the future. Go, I said finally. We'll talk in the morning. While Reiner was in the shower, I quickly changed the bedding in his room, dusted the shelves, and opened the window to let some air in. Everything was as it had been when he was a teenager, and I was a mother taking care of her son. But this was not before. Between us lay a year of separation, a year of pain and loneliness, a year I had spent trying to learn to live without him, without his approval, without hope for his love. When he came out of the bathroom, clean but still exhausted, I showed him his room and wished him good night. He tried to hug me, but I stepped back, not ready for such intimacy. "Good night, Reiner," I said quietly. "Let's talk in the morning." In my room, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Thoughts swirled around my head like autumn leaves in the wind. I remembered the first time I saw Verity, how I sensed something was wrong, how I tried to warn my son. I remembered his anger, his cruel words, how he kicked me out of his house. "You're just jealous because I have a life and you have nothing but your pathetic job as a cashier and an empty house." Those words burned like hot iron, even a year later. Did he really think that about me? About the woman who gave him everything, her time, her love, her life? And then I remembered other moments, how Fiona only called me when she needed help with the children, how my grandchildren looked through me as if I were invisible, how Reiner forgot my birthday but always remembered when he needed money or advice. Maybe he was right? Maybe my life really is pathetic. Working as a cashier in a supermarket, an empty house, children who only remember me when they need something. But the last year has changed me. I found friends, interests, and started taking care of myself instead of just others. I learned to value myself, my time, and my desires. And I wasn't sure I was ready to go back to my old role, always giving, never getting anything in return. I woke up earlier than usual that morning. It was only 5 o'clock, but I couldn't sleep. I quietly went down to the kitchen, trying not to wake Reiner, and started making breakfast, pancakes, his favorite since childhood. When the batter was almost ready, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. He entered the kitchen looking a little better than yesterday, well rested, but still lost. "Good morning," he said uncertainly. "Good morning," I replied, pouring the batter into the pan. "I hope you still like pancakes." "I do," he smiled weakly. "Thanks." We ate breakfast in silence, broken only by the clinking of forks against plates. There was so much to say, but neither of us knew where to start. "I'm going to take the day off today," I finally said. "I'll call Dennis and tell him I'm sick." "Don't." Reiner shook his head. "I don't want to interfere with your life." "You're not interfering, but we have a lot to discuss." He nodded, looking at his plate. "I know, and I'm ready to hear everything you have to say. I deserve it." We moved to the living room after breakfast. Reiner sat down on the sofa, and I sat in the armchair opposite him. There was a distance between us, not just physical. "I tried to find you," he said suddenly. "When everything started falling apart, I wanted to call you, ask for advice, but my pride wouldn't let me, and then it was too late." "I knew something was wrong," I replied. "Fiona called and said she couldn't get through to you. She wanted me to go to Florida to check if everything was okay." "And why didn't you go?" There was no accusation in his voice, only curiosity. I looked him straight in the eye. "Because you made it clear you didn't want to see me. You kicked me out of your house, Reiner. You said I was jealous of your happiness, that my life was pathetic, that you didn't need me anymore." He flinched as if he'd been hit. "That's not what I meant." I was angry. I didn't know what I was saying. "No," I shook my head. "That's exactly what you meant. And you know what? In some ways you were right. My life revolved around you. You, Fiona, your grandchildren. I forgot about myself, my desires, my interests. I was ready to come running at the first call, even if it meant neglecting my own needs." Reiner was silent, his head bowed. "But this year has changed me," I continued. "I've found friends and activities that bring me joy. I've stopped waiting for calls from my children, who only remember me when they need something." "Mom, Let me finish," I raised my hand. "I love you, Reiner. You are my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I'm not going to be the woman who loses herself in her children and forgets about herself anymore. I'm not going to be the one who's always available, always ready to help, expecting nothing in return." "I understand," he nodded, "and I don't expect you to forgive me or take me back into your life as if nothing happened. I just didn't know where else to go." You can stay here, I repeated. But on my terms. This is my home, my life. I love you and want to help, but not at the expense of my own happiness and self-respect. Reiner looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. Thank you, Mom. I don't deserve your kindness. It's not about what you deserve, I said more gently. It's about what I choose. And I choose to help you, despite the past, but with consideration for the present. We talked all day. Reiner told me more about his life with Verity, how he gradually realized that she wasn't who she claimed to be, how he tried to save his marriage, even when it became obvious that she was only interested in his money, how he distanced himself from his children because she didn't like it when they called. I was in a fog, he said, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, like I was hypnotized. She knew what to say, when to push, when to back off. And when I started to have doubts, she reminded me of you, of how you didn't support our love. Classic manipulator tactics, I remarked. Isolate the victim from those who could open their eyes. Exactly, Reiner sighed, and I fell for it like a fool. You're not the first or the last, I shrugged. People like Verity are professionals. They know how to find vulnerable people and exploit their weaknesses. And I was vulnerable, Reiner admitted. After my divorce from Tessa, with that feeling of failure, Verity came along at just the right time and said exactly what I wanted to hear. I remembered his words about his children, about how he had distanced himself from them, and a wave of anger rose inside me again. Reiner, I can understand how she manipulated you in relation to me or even Tessa, but your children, how could you let her come between you and Oliver and Iris? He flinched as if I had hit him. I don't know, he whispered. It's unforgivable, I know. I was selfish. All I cared about was myself, my feelings, my new life, and now I'm afraid they'll never forgive me. And they'll be right. I looked at my son, broken, remorseful, having lost everything, and saw the boy I had raised, the child who cried when he broke his favorite toys, the teenager who was angry at the world, the young man trying to find his place in life. He had made a terrible mistake, hurt everyone who loved him, but he was still my son. You need to talk to them, I said, to Oliver and Iris. They deserve an explanation, an apology. They deserve a father. I don't know how, Reiner admitted. What am I supposed to say? I'm sorry I left you for a woman who cheated on me? You tell them the truth, I replied. Tell them you made a mistake, that you regret it, that you love them and want to be part of their lives. The rest will come with time. We fell silent. Outside the window, the sun was setting, bathing the room in golden hues. The day passed in conversation, in attempts to understand each other, in confessions and explanations. I felt tired, but also a sense of relief, as if the heavy burden I had been carrying all year had become a little lighter. I'll call Tessa tomorrow, said Reiner. I'll ask if I can see the kids. That's a good start, I nodded. And then you need to find a job. He rubbed his face with his hands. Something to help me get back on my feet. I can't live off you. Don't worry about that right now, I said. I have enough to support you until you find something suitable. That wasn't entirely true. My savings and pension were barely enough to pay the bills and live modestly. But I couldn't not help my child, even if he had long since ceased to be a child. Thank you, Mom. Reiner looked at me gratefully. Not just for this, for not slamming the door in my face yesterday, for listening to me, for giving me a chance to make things right. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because despite all my words about self-respect and setting boundaries, part of me was just happy that he was back, that my son was with me again, that I could see him, talk to him, take care of him. And another part of me remembered the pain of betrayal, remembered a year of loneliness, remembered how easily he had given me up for a woman he barely knew. Two parts of my heart were fighting each other, the mother who was ready to forgive everything, and the woman who had learned to value herself and her feelings. And I didn't know which one would win. The first few days after Reiner's return passed in a strange rhythm. We moved cautiously around the house, like dancers who had forgotten the steps and were afraid of stepping on each other's feet. I went to work, he stayed at home, looking for jobs online and preparing simple meals so that I wouldn't have to worry about it after my shift. We talked, but only about everyday things, avoiding serious topics, as if afraid of breaking the fragile truce. On Sunday, 4 days after he showed up at my doorstep, I woke up with a clear understanding. This couldn't go on. I couldn't pretend that nothing had happened, that there wasn't a year of pain and silence between us. I couldn't let things take their course, hoping that time would heal everything. I needed to set rules, boundaries, a foundation for a new relationship. Reiner was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He was frying eggs, whistling a tune. "Good morning, Mom," he smiled. "Coffee's ready." "Thanks." I poured myself a cup and sat down at the table. "Reiner, we need to talk." He froze for a moment, then nodded and turned off the stove. "I knew this moment would come," he said, dividing the eggs between our plates. "I'm ready." We sat across from each other, just like during our first serious conversation a few days ago. But now I felt more confident, more clear about what I wanted. "I'm glad you're back," I began. "I really am. But we can't pretend that nothing happened. That you didn't kick me out of your house, cut off all contact for a year, chose a woman who ended up cheating on you over me." Reiner lowered his eyes. "I know, Mom, and I don't expect you to just forget and forgive. It's not about forgiveness." I shook my head. "I've already forgiven you. You're my son, and I'll always love you no matter what. But it's about respect. Within boundaries, in how we build our relationship going forward." He looked at me curiously. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing new rules," I said firmly. "First, you can stay here until you get back on your feet, but on the condition that you actively look for work. I don't expect you to find something perfect right away, but I want to see an effort." Reiner nodded. "I've already sent out a few resumes, mostly to boat and yacht repair shops like before." "Okay." I took a sip of coffee. "Second, we'll split the household chores. I'm not your housekeeper, and I'm not going to cook, clean, and do laundry for you like I did when you were a child." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "I can take care of the cooking if you want. I've gotten pretty good at it over the last year." "We'll make a schedule," I decided. Rule number 3. I have my own life, my own friends, my own activities. I'm not going to give those up or change my schedule to meet your expectations. I have library club meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays and yoga on Wednesdays. That's not up for discussion." Reiner looked a little surprised, but nodded. "I wasn't going to ask you to give up your activities." "Okay," I continued. "Fourth, finances. I'll pay the bills and buy the groceries. Everything else is up to you. Once you find a job, I expect you to contribute your share to the household budget." "Fair enough," Reiner agreed. "And last but not least," I looked him straight in the eye, "I expect honesty and respect. No secrets, no manipulation, no insults. If you don't like something, say so. If there are problems, we'll solve them together. I will no longer allow myself to be treated like a second-class citizen just because I am your mother." Reiner was silent for a few seconds, thinking about my words. Then he nodded. "I agree with everything, and I want to add one more rule, if I may." "What is it?" "I promise to restore my relationship with Oliver and Iris. I'll call them, see them when Tessa allows, and never again let anything or anyone come between me and my children. And I want you to help me with that, if you can." I felt something warm spread through my chest. This Reiner sitting in front of me was more like the man I had known before Verity came along, a responsible father, a caring son. "I'll help," I promised, "but the hard work is up to you." "I understand," he said, reaching across the table and taking my hand. "So it's a deal? New rules, new relationship?" I shook his hand. "It's a deal." The next day, Reiner called Tessa. I wasn't eavesdropping, but I could hear his voice from the living room. Quiet, uncertain, with a hint of remorse. When he finished the conversation, he looked both exhausted and inspired. "She agreed," he said as he walked into the kitchen where I was preparing lunch. "I can see the kids this Saturday, in the park where you had the picnic." "That's wonderful," I smiled. "Tessa has always been a sensible woman." "She said she's doing it not for me, but for the kids." Reiner ran his hand through his hair. "And that if I disappear from their lives again, she won't give me another chance." "That's fair," I nodded. cutting vegetables. You have to prove that you're worthy of their trust. It will take time. Reiner sat down at the table and watched me cook. I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared they won't want to see me, that they'll hate me for abandoning them. They're children, I said, turning to him. Children are amazingly capable of forgiveness if they see sincere remorse and real change. Just be honest with them. Don't promise the impossible. And above all, be consistent. Don't disappear again. I won't disappear, he promised. Never again. On Saturday, I walked Reiner to the bus stop. He was nervous, like a schoolboy before his first date, constantly checking the time, pulling at his shirt, going over what he was going to say in his head. Everything will be fine, I reassured him. Just remember, they're your children. They love you no matter what. He nodded, swallowing hard, and got on the bus. I watched him drive away and thought about how strange life had become. 2 weeks ago, I didn't know if my son was alive, and now I was seeing him off to meet his grandchildren. While Reiner was gone, I called Marjorie. We hadn't seen each other since he came back. I'd been too busy trying to adjust to the new situation. "Eleanor," she exclaimed, "I thought you'd forgotten about me." "Never," I smiled into the phone. "There's just been a lot going on." "What's been going on?" Marjorie's voice sounded curious. "Reiner's back," I said simply. Pause. "Your son? The one who left for Florida with that woman?" "Yes, he came back a week ago and is staying with me." "And?" Marjorie was clearly waiting for details. "What happened? Why did he come back?" I told her the whole story. How Verity had cheated on Reiner, how he had lost everything, how he had shown up at my doorstep broken and remorseful, about our conversations, about the new rules, about his desire to rebuild his relationship with his children. "Have you forgiven him?" Marjorie asked when I finished my story. I thought about it. "Not entirely. I'm taking him back into my life and trying to help him get back on his feet. But complete forgiveness, that will come with time, if he proves that he's really changed, that he values me and our relationship." "That's reasonable," Marjorie approved. "You didn't slam the door shut, but you didn't throw it open either. You set boundaries." Exactly. I was glad my friend understood me. This is a new phase for both of us. He's learning to respect me not just as a mother, but as a person with her own desires and needs. And I'm learning not to lose myself in him, to maintain my identity. "I'm proud of you," Marjorie said sincerely. "Many mothers would just take him back without any conditions, let him walk all over them again. Old Eleanor would have done just that," I admitted. "But this year has changed me. I don't want to be just someone's mother or grandmother anymore. I want to be Eleanor Prescott, a woman who knows her worth." Reiner returned from his meeting with the children late in the evening. I was waiting for him in the living room with a book, one of those recommended by the book club. "How did it go?" I asked when he came in, clearly tired, but with a slight smile on his face. "Better than I expected," he said, taking off his jacket and sinking into the armchair opposite me. It was awkward at first. They didn't rush to hug me like I had secretly hoped. Oliver hardly spoke for the first hour, but then we started playing ball like we used to, and the ice broke. "And Iris?" She showed me her drawings, and tears glistened in Rainer's eyes. "She's grown so much, Mom, and she's talented, really talented. She drew our old house, the one we lived in with Tessa, with all the details, the swing in the yard, my boat on the driveway, even the flowers you helped us plant." I smiled, remembering those days, happy days filled with the family harmony we had all now lost. "Tessa said that if everything goes well, I can take them on weekends," Reiner continued. "Not right away, of course. First, I have to prove that I'm reliable." "That's a good start," I said, closing the book. "Step by step, day by day." "Yes," he said, staring thoughtfully into space. "You know, when I was sitting there in the park watching Oliver try to teach Iris how to throw a ball, I thought, how could I have left that? How could I have chosen a woman I barely knew over my own children?" I didn't answer. I had the same question, but about him, how could he choose Verity over me, his mother, who had been there for him his whole life? "I didn't recognize myself that year," Reiner said quietly, as if reading my mind. "It was like I was under some kind of spell. All my values, everything that was important to me, my family, my children, you, all took a back seat. All that was left was Verity and her desires. "These things happen," I said softly. "People fall in love. They lose their heads, especially after painful breakups, when they're vulnerable." "But not to that extent," Reiner objected. "Not to the point of completely abandoning yourself and your loved ones." I should have been stronger. "What's done is done," I said, getting up to go to bed. "It's important that you realize your mistakes and are trying to fix them. That takes courage." Reiner also stood up. "Thank you, Mom, for giving me a second chance. I know I don't deserve it." "Second chances aren't given for merit," I replied. "They're given out of love." "But remember, a second chance doesn't mean everything will be the same as before. It's an opportunity to build something new and better, and that takes work. From both sides." He nodded, understanding. "Good night, Mom." "Good night, Reiner." Over the next few weeks, our lives gradually took shape. Reiner found a job at a small boat repair shop in Yonkers, not as prestigious as his own business, but it allowed him to use his skills. Every Saturday, he met with the children and sometimes brought them to our house for lunch. Oliver and Iris gradually thawed, getting used to their father again and learning to trust him once more. I continued working at the supermarket, although my hours were cut. Dennis was hinting more and more insistently that it was time for me to retire, but I didn't give up. Work gave me not only money, but also a sense of independence and purpose. Besides, now that Reiner was contributing to the household budget, the financial situation was less stressful. Reiner and I gradually found a new balance in our relationship. There were moments of tension, of course. Old habits and expectations don't disappear overnight. Sometimes he forgot that I was no longer the mother who would drop everything for him. Sometimes I caught myself overreacting to his words, fearing another betrayal. But we learned. We learned to talk. We learned to listen. We learned to respect each other's boundaries. One evening, about 2 months after his return, we were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. Autumn was already setting in, painting the leaves in shades of gold and red. "I got a letter from the lawyer today," Reiner said, breaking the cozy silence, "about the divorce with Verity." "What does it say?" I asked, sipping my tea. "She's not contesting it," he shrugged. "I guess she got everything she wanted from me, and now she doesn't even need me formally." "That's good," I said. "A clean break, no complications." "Yes," Reiner said, looking at the horizon. "You know, I'm not angry with her anymore. It's not that I've forgiven her, but I realized that I was partly to blame. I allowed myself to be deceived because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale she sold me." I nodded, understanding what he meant. Sometimes we become accomplices in our own deception, closing our eyes to obvious signs of danger because the truth is too painful. "Tessa says I can have the kids for the whole weekend next time," Reiner continued, a hint of pride in his voice. 2 days with an overnight stay. "That's a big step," I smiled. "She's starting to trust you." "Yes," he turned to me. "You don't mind if they stay here?" "I know you have your library club meeting on Saturdays." "I don't mind," I replied, "but I won't change my plans. You have to take care of your children yourself without counting on your grandmother to help out." In the past, such an answer would have been unthinkable for me. In the past, I would have canceled everything to be with my grandchildren, to help my son. But now I knew my worth. I knew I had a right to my own time, my own interests. "Of course," Reiner nodded without a hint of resentment. "I understand. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't inconveniencing you." "No inconvenience at all." I finished my tea. "This is your home too, and your children are always welcome here." We fell silent again, watching the last rays of the sun disappear over the horizon. The air smelled of fallen leaves and smoke from someone's fireplace. The smells of autumn, the smells of change. "Mom," Reiner broke the silence, "I want you to know. I'm proud of you, of who you've become this year. Strong, independent, someone who knows her own worth." I looked at him in surprise. "Really?" "Really," he smiled. "I always took you for granted. As a mother who is always there, always ready to help, always putting us, me and Fiona, on first. I never thought about what it cost you, what you gave up for us. And now that you won't let me or anyone else take advantage of you, it's strange, but I respect you even more." His words touched me deeply. All my life, I had tried to be a good mother, thinking that meant self-sacrifice, giving up my own desires for my children. But it turned out that true respect came when I learned to value myself as much as I valued them. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means a lot to me." "I know I can't fix the past," Reiner continued. "I can't bring back the year I pushed you away, but I promise I'll never take you for granted again. I'll never let anyone come between us, and I'll try every day to be the son you deserve." I reached out and squeezed his hand, "And I promise to always be there for you, but not to lose myself in you. To love you, but not forget myself. To support you, but not let you use me." Reiner squeezed my hand in response. "New rules, new relationship. New rules, new relationship," I echoed. We sat there holding hands until dusk turned to night. There was a long road ahead, restoring trust, rebuilding relationships, healing old wounds, but I felt a hope I hadn't felt in a long time. At 65, I finally learned the most important lesson: to love others without losing myself, to value my family without sacrificing my own identity. And despite my age, my fatigue from work, and all of life's difficulties, I felt stronger than ever before, because now I knew my worth, and no one, not my children, not my grandchildren, not society, could ever convince me otherwise.